We see you, our neighbors, our friends, our acquaintances, standing outside, looking in, wondering about church and faith. You may never ask us a single question, but we know you're wondering the same things we do. Is there any meaning to this life? Where do we go when we die? Is God calling me? This Sunday, we invite you to rediscover church, that we're not so different, you and me. Church is not just for insiders. Ask Jesus. He's been waiting for you.
If this is your first time visiting with us at Westside, we are especially grateful you're here. If this is your first time in any church, we especially are grateful to have you with us. You'll find that we're just like everybody else. We are people with stories. We are people with problems. But we are people who have been brought together because of the voice of one who said, no matter where you've been, no matter what you've done, no matter how ungodly or villainous you've been, no matter where you've ended up, I want you to have a seat at my table. I want you to live in my family. And I'm going to give you a new story so that every day of your life from here on out will be living out of the joy of what I've done for you and in anticipation of what awaits you. And we would love for that to be your story, too. We're also people who ask big questions. Why am I here? Where do we go when we die? Why do good things happen to bad people? And why do bad things happen to good people? Why is it that I tried my best to do everything right and life seems to be treating me rotten? Is there a God? And if there is, what would I ask him if I saw him? Is he calling me? And what is he calling me to? How do I make the most of the rest of my life? And is there a more satisfying way to live my life than what meets the eye? These are just some of the many kinds of questions we could ask. And over the next 12 weeks, we're going to be dealing with a fraction of those big questions that we can ask. And from the pulpit, I'm going to be trying to address some of these in a way that says, here's why it's a real difficult question, maybe a problem for all of us, and here's how Christians might see it differently, and why they find their ultimate joy and fulfillment, the answer to all of life's troubles in Jesus Christ. And after the service, we're going to have some classes, some learning communities, and there's all kinds. We've got one that meets in here that's going to talk about how the Old Testament is fulfilled in the New Testament with types and shadows. There's a class just for young adults about marriage relationships. Upstairs, as I mentioned before, we're going to be talking about these big questions, diving deeper into them in a judgment-free zone, intended for those of you who are new to the faith or questioning about faith. Or if you're a church member and you want to know how to talk to your neighbor about these big questions, two of our deacons are going to be taking what's known as the Alpha course and applying it to Westside questions. And we're going to be doing that upstairs in room 209 right after service. Whatever you have in mind, I hope you'll stay. Hope you'll let one of us take you to lunch after. We're so glad you're here. I want to show you a picture, and I'm curious if you know what this picture is. This is a painting. Just want you to know that. I got that one right. In my undergrad days, I wanted to take some honors courses so I could graduate with an honors degree. And one semester, there was an honors class being offered, but it didn't have enough students to make. And so my advisor asked me if I would take the class so the class would make. It was a senior level art history course for art history majors in the Honors College. To say that I faked it through this class would be an understatement. But I do remember one thing, the professor actually helped me enough to give me a painting to do my research paper on, and it was this one. And I remember looking at it and then turning it sideways and squinting and asking the question that all art teachers hate students to ask. What is this supposed to be? He was very kind to me. He said, listen, I know your background, and knowing your background, I figured you would enjoy this. The person who painted this is Vasily Kandinsky. And he was a preacher of sorts. He was a theosophist who threw all that away so that he could focus on what he thought to be the most pure form of communication. He thought he could do with art what musicians say they can do with music, capture pure feeling and spirit in a painting. That's great, I said. Now, what is this supposed to be? And he said, well, I'll cut to the chase. You're not supposed to ask that question, but if you want to know, Kandinsky would tell you that here he paints the themes of resurrection, the judgment day, the flood, and the Garden of Eden. It's all there. Do you see it? Ask John Keller or Steve Choate, and they will tell you that's all there and more, and they'll tell you more than you ever possibly could have imagined about this painting. But my takeaway was that I never would have even thought there was anything more to it until I talked to someone who has spent their life studying it. And I wonder if life is like that for us. I'm curious if you take a look at just sort of how your life has been. If I was able to get a copy of your phone, which is actually recording a narrative of your life, whether it be in the photos and videos section or it be the social media that you use, I could piece together a narrative of your life, and it would seem like everything is there. There are all your birthdays. There are all your great celebrations and triumphs, all the vacations you've been on, all the jobs you've had, all the difficult moments when the people you dated and the people who you broke up with. There's your stays in the hospital. There's your times attending funerals. And now I've got a video of your life. Now here's the question. Is that all there is? Or does your life hold something more than what I can piece together from the profiles you've posted about your life? I'm curious because in 1969, Peggy Lee recorded a song where each verse describes an event in her life that at first seemed so grand, so wonderful, but it always ended up leaving her feeling empty. There was going to the circus. There was falling in love. But if you listen to the verses, each verse led to the same chorus, and these are the words. Is that all there is? Is that all there is? If that's all there is, friends, then let's keep dancing. Let's break out the booze and have a ball if that's all there is. It's her take on the phrase, let's eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. Look around. You know, it seems to me that we've had decades and decades and decades of a summer of discontent. We entered a new century, and we thought maybe the new century would give us all the hope that we were looking for in the last century. You may remember when 1899, well, you won't remember this, but maybe you've heard, and when 1899 turned to 1900, the thinking of the day was, this will be the century when we bring in peace and hope and contentment, and it turned into the bloodiest century in the history of the world. And we thought the same thing in the year 2000. And yet the average suicide rate rose 35% this century. And the reason for that is because hopelessness is the name of the game. We're the most advanced civilization in the history of the world. Do you realize that the chief mode of transportation 200 years ago was the same as it was 2,000 years ago. We have grown exponentially. But there's more self-help books than there's ever been before. There's more people trying to figure out what's wrong with them than ever before. Hopelessness is the name of the game. We have a hole in our soul, and we can't seem to fill it. We long for something more. Now, there are clues in our culture. Hopelessness seemed to be the theme of Green Day's song, Boulevard of Broken Dreams in 2004. If you're a young Gen Xer or an older millennial, you may remember this song. Billy Joe says, "I walk alone. My shadow is the only one that walks beside me." But keep listening, and you'll see this line in every chorus. Sometimes I wish someone out there would find me. Till then, I walk alone. All right, older Gen Z folks, maybe you remember Harry Styles' Sign of the Times in 2017. He says, life is nothing more than feeling stuck and dodging bullets. And he says, just stop your crying. It's a sign of the times, but listen carefully, and you'll hear a longing. Later he says, we got to get out of this place. We got to get away from here. We can meet again somewhere far away from here. We long for something more, something that gives us meaning and purpose in our lives, something to fill the hole in our souls that will satisfy us and give us a satisfying life. So we ask, what could it be? Maybe it's money. Maybe it's career. Maybe it's the right relationship. Then I'll finally find meaning and contentment in my life. 3,000 years ago, a man named Solomon wrote a book, and he had more brains than most of us combined. He had more money than you could ever dream. He had more wives and girls on the side than you've ever seen on a Jerry Springer show. He had everything this world says might give you meaning and happiness in your life. He wrote a book about it. It's called Ecclesiastes. And in that book, you will not be surprised by the list of things he says he tried to bring meaning to his life. He tried money. But in chapter 5 of his book, he says, let me tell you something, whoever loves money never has enough. He thought work might be the answer. But he said, you know what? I work and toil, and then I'm tired all the time. And when I get to the end of my life, I look back, and somebody else uses everything I worked for, and they don't appreciate it. Maybe relationships will do it, but every failed relationship proves that whatever you thought the next was going to give you won't give you what you think it will. Work harder, achieve more, and then watch as it only compounds your headaches. Maybe it's in great learning and wisdom. That's where he begins the book. But the more you study, the more you know. And the more you know, the more you forget. And the more you forget, the less you know. By the way, that's a good one to use on your teachers. Why study? Besides, as you go off to grad school and beyond, you specialize. And I heard this one from Steve Choate. You learn more and more about less and less until you learn everything there is to know about absolutely nothing. So what is life? Solomon says, you ready for the answer? It's a vapor. It's a vapor. If this is all there is. In December of 2005, the famous actor Jim Carrey was at the height of his career. If you can name a famous Jim Carrey movie that you loved and watched, I'll guarantee you it was one he made before 2005, because that was the height of his career. And there he was, trying to be interviewed about a new upcoming movie by a Canadian journalist. And he said the most remarkable thing. He said, I hope everybody could get rich and famous and have everything they've ever dreamed of. So then they'll know that that's not the answer. Hope and peace and contentment are things we all long for. But youthfulness doesn't last. Money doesn't heal all wounds, and every technological advancement only makes the problem worse. Every day in our newspapers or in the events of our lives, we come face to face with the chilling reality, the harshness of life, the brutality of injustice, and the nagging questions that won't go away. Is this all there is? And the church says no. No. What if I told you that the God I see in Jesus Christ has the answers to all of life's longings, the things that money can't fill, that your relationships can't fill, that even religion, as you probably have heard it or know it, can't fill? And the answer is a person, and his name is Jesus Christ. And on one occasion, in the Gospel of John, Jesus stood up and said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And packed into those 10 words are 3 incredibly important claims that lie at the heart of our deepest longings. The first is that he says, I am the way. What way? Think of something, some major movement in history that has brought about goodness and beauty in the world. And I bet you I can point to something that comes to us through Jesus Christ. Did you know that in the first century it was a dangerous thing to be born? In fact, twins were considered a bad omen, and either you or your twin would be destroyed immediately in many societies in the first century. Most children did not survive infancy. Those who did, most did not survive past the age of 8. It was a hard time to be alive. Did you know that it was considered a sign of beauty to your body to take children that you did not want and put them deep into the woods where they would starve or be killed in some other way? There were painted circles in the city of Rome, painted purple, and they were for human garage sales. And you could put anyone you want that you didn't want to take care of anymore, and anyone could pick one up for whatever deviant practices they had in mind. That was the norm in society. And then Jesus came along. And Jesus said, when little children wanted to come see him and were being blocked, let the little children come to me. Don't hinder them. Of such is the kingdom of heaven. If you want to know what it means to belong to the kingdom of God, take a look at little children. They're the model example of what I want you to be like. And if you think it's wonderful in our society that there are places that care for hurting children, whether it be children's homes or it be pregnancy centers that help people understand how there's folks who will take care of you through all of this. It's not a coincidence that you won't find that in the ancient world, but you find it throughout Christian history. In the 2nd century, there was a letter describing Christians, and it said, let me tell you who these people are. They marry, they beget children, but they don't destroy their offspring. That was a phrase in the 2nd century to describe what made Christians unique. Did you know that there really was no such thing in the ancient world as an organized charity effort? You can't find it. Polybius said, no one gives anything to anyone if they can help it. If you've ever been at a place where you saw, maybe after a major hurricane or a major storm, folks getting together to try to provide relief for them, some organized charity effort, did you know that you find that historically with the rise of Christianity? What about hospitals? There is no example in ancient history of a hospital as you know it. Best you can find is some very rich, wealthy people who would provide doctors to take care of slaves on their property so they could get back to work. But the idea of an open place for anyone in need, that was started by people who heard Jesus say that there's a parable of a good Samaritan And I want you to go and treat other people like that. In the 300s, there was a big council of believers. They were coming up with all kinds of interesting things, but before they left, the emperor said, as you go, I want you to establish hospitals wherever you go. And there are stories after stories in the late 3rd century, 4th century, 5th century of what we now call hospitals. In the Middle Ages, there were over 2,000 hospitals being run by monasteries. To prove the point, think of the closest hospital to where you grew up, and let me ask you if the name Baptist, Methodist, or Jude is on it. It's not a coincidence. Did you know that any country that says, you all Christians, you don't have much respect for women, don't know their history? Find any country that is rooted in a Christian past, and you'll find advancement for women far more than countries that don't have that. And why is that? Because as Jesus is dying on the cross, one of the last things he thinks of is, will somebody please take care of my mother? Because the early church included people who were put up on a pedestal. When Paul writes a letter to the Romans and says, let me tell you about the folks who are making a difference for me in this world. Look at how many women are listed in Romans 16. What about taking care of the elderly, taking care of widows? Did you know that it was pretty common practice to say, if you've outlived your usefulness, I know that's a harsh thing to say, that's a quote from the ancient world, then you might as well just get out of the way for a younger generation. But Jesus said that if there are widows who need help, you put them on the church roll. And Paul said, if you don't take care of your own grandmothers, grandfathers, parents, you have denied the faith and you're worse than an unbeliever. And it changed the world. Christianity has provided goodness and beauty in the world. Jesus said, follow me. And Western civilization, for the most part, has tried to follow him. And you'll see it in the culture in which we live that is borrowing the fruits of Christianity while denying the roots. I'm not just the way, Jesus says, I am the truth. The truth. In court, they'll ask you if you will say the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And what they're saying is we want an objective standard so we can bring about justice in this world. And if you believe in justice, you ought to value the Christian faith that follows a just and loving God. 1948, there was a lot of interest in this question. After all, there was a brutal war. And there were people needing something. And so in 1948, the International Statement, Declaration of Human Rights, says we believe all people are born free and equal in dignity and rights. What a beautiful statement. Beautiful statement, and absolutely vacuous. Meaningless. Do you know why? Because in ancient Greece, there were far more slaves than slave owners. But slave owners were the only ones who could vote or write the laws. And if you were to ask 51% of the land-owning voting public whether or not you think slavery is a good idea, 51% would have said sure. Saying it doesn't make it right. So declaring we believe all people are born free and equal in dignity and rights is a great statement, but there's no asterisk or subnote. It's rooted in nothing other than that's what 51% of us believe right now. But can I tell you something? When America's founding fathers got together, who were by no means perfect, and in no way do I want to suggest that this is all you need to know about a very complicated past. What's fascinating to me is they thought they needed to ground that in something. And do you know what they said? We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal and are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. They thought you needed to ground it. To prove the point, 1976, there was a debate in Denton, Texas. And in that debate, at that time, the world's most well-known atheist was a man named Antony Flew. And he debated a much lesser-known Christian philosopher and theologian who taught at a place called Harding University, and his name was Thomas Warren. And in that debate, Tom Warren said, I want to ask you 3 questions, and if you don't answer, I'll assume the answer is no. Please answer these 3 questions. Number 1, is there a right and wrong? a truth about what is right and what is wrong that transcends any time and place. Well, Dr. Flew was a good atheist. And he knew that if he said yes to that, he's referring to a transcendent principle. But transcendent means above the natural and the physical. But if there's anything above the natural and the physical, you can't say that all there is the natural and the physical. So he said, no, there's no such thing as an objective truth about right and wrong that transcends time and place. Question number 2. When the Nazis put little children in boxcars and coated the boxcars with quicklime, so when they closed the door and shut it, and they ran that train, that quicklime would burn the skin off their little bodies. And the fortunate ones didn't survive. Was that wrong? Dr. Flew wasn't just a good atheist, he was a good man. He fought in the Royal Air Force for the British. He saw this firsthand. And so he said, of course, yes, that was wrong. And now the trap is set. Question 3. What law did they violate? Now think about it. German law is one of the choices, but the German law at that time was obey the Führer. They didn't break German law. They broke British law, but what good is that? Suppose you and I are driving our car in England on the right side of the road, in both senses of the word, and we get stopped, and they try to fine us, and we say, here's the American driver's manual. That won't work. Why? Because they're not under American law. The Germans weren't under British law. What law do they violate? And so Dr. Flew clicks the box that says other and writes international law, which did not exist at the time, then puts in parentheses, see Nuremberg. Nuremberg is where we tried the Nazis for war crimes. Now think about what a difficult job that was then and how much harder it would be now. To go to some place and say there is no such thing as an international law, but here's why what these people did was so wrong that they ought to be put to death for it. And the prosecuting attorney was an American Supreme Court justice by the name of Robert Jackson. And in his closing speech, he told this group of jurors and judges from all different countries, here's why they ought to be tried for what they did was wrong, objectively wrong. And his answer was, because there's a higher law that transcends time and place. In other words, the only way you can justify question 2 is if you also believe in question 1. But if you believe in question 1, you've got to believe in something transcendent that goes beyond you. An objective truth that establishes justice in the world. Founding fathers understood that. Jesus says, I am the way, and then he says, I am truth. There is objective right and wrong, and you go look for a foundation other than in my Father. You'll have a hard time finding it. The third thing he says is, I'm not just the way, I'm not just the truth, I am life. I am the life. I'm where you find real, true, meaningful life. And he says it explicitly. Jesus, again in John's gospel a bit later, Jesus says, I came that they may have life and that they may have it abundantly. Now that's the English Standard Version. But to help you understand what he's saying, I want you to look at it in more contemporary translations. He says, my purpose is to give them a rich and satisfying life. Or look at the way the Message puts it. I came that they can have real and eternal life more and better than they ever dreamed of. I know you think Christianity is all about a retirement plan. You live a terrible life now and then maybe you get to enjoy eternity. That's not what Jesus says. He says, if you follow me, you'll find a more meaningful life for you, your neighbor, for your country, for the world. A more satisfying life. I offer you the richness of life. I made life. I know what you need, and I know what you want here and after you die. This is why when you read about all the persecution and torture Christians went through, and you think, why did anybody sign up to be a Christian those first few centuries? I can tell you why. Because it doesn't matter how long you live. What matters is how meaningful your life was. And these people were willing to turn in 80 years of meaningless wandering, searching in vain for something to satisfy them for a day. And they gave in to something that gave them all they ever wanted and more, and were willing to live with it for just one day, knowing that they had eternity in their hearts. I want you to know what I know. I want you to consider Jesus Christ as not just someone who gives a great retirement plan, but gives you meaning and hope in your life. C.S. Lewis, the great Christian apologist, once said, "Christianity, if false, is of no importance. But if it's true, it's of infinite importance. The only thing it cannot be is moderately important." So let me ask you, you know that every one of us has an appointment. We have a rendezvous with death. We're in a ship. We're sailing. And we're either going to end up at one of two ports. When we die, we're either going to meet nothing or we're going to meet something. If Christianity is true, it is of infinite importance. Choosing not to care is really not an option. May I encourage you to consider the claims of Jesus Christ. Thank you for joining us. I hope you've been encouraged. I hope you've been enriched. And if you have any questions, any thoughts, any comments, reach out to us at prayers@wschurch.net. God bless you. Tune in next week.